So we will start today with the 2020 John Dalton Medal lecture by Amilcare Porporato from the Princeton University, and he was awarded the John Dalton Medal for seminal contributions to the field of ecohydrology. Before the talk, Amilcare's talk, we are going to listen to the laudation that would be kindly given by Dr. Paolo Dodorico. So Paolo, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria Helena. Dear colleagues, it is with great pleasure that I'm here to introduce Amilcare Porporato as the winner of the EGU Dalton Medal. Amilcare is one of the most creative, insightful, and productive scientists in our field, whose work has shaped modern research in hydrology. Early in his career, he developed, and this is how I came to know his work, he developed new non-linear methods for hydrological prediction based on deterministic chaos theory. This research produced new formal theoretical and analytical tools that unveiled the low-dimensional signal embedded in hydrological records. This work led to the development of low-dimensional models of river flow prediction, when many hydrologists were developing detailed high-dimensional models, often challenging to parameterize. Amilcare recognized the need for minimalist approaches that captured the fundamental processes. I believe Amilcare is best known for his process-based analysis of soil moisture dynamics and a whole line of research that originated from it. With Ignacio Rodriguez Iturbe, he developed a framework for the study of soil moisture based on water balance equation forced by stochastic precipitation. This approach captured fundamental aspects of these dynamics, and through the use of stochastic differential equations, he developed a framework that is a landmark in hydrology, in that it provides an effective framework for the investigation of mutual interactions between climate, soil, and vegetation in coupled plant-water dynamics. This work laid the foundations of new research in soil moisture dynamics that contributed to the emergence of ecohydrology, a new research field at the confluence of ecology and hydrology. And the interest in this new research field turned out to be really contagious, as evidenced by the subsequent intensification of interactions between these two disciplines. Amilcare is commonly recognized as one of the fathers of ecohydrology, and his 2001 publications in Advances in Water Resources, as well as his book, Ecohydrology of Water-Controlled Ecosystems, co-authored with Professor Ignacio Rodriguez Iturbe, remain major landmarks for the study of plant-water interactions. Porporato's research on the ecohydrological drivers of nitrogen-carbon cycles has provided a unifying framework that sheds light on the sensitivity of biogeochemical processes to changes in both mean and variance of precipitation. Remarkable is also his ability to link soil moisture dynamics to plant physiology and the near-surface atmosphere, which led to elegant theoretical frameworks for the integrated analysis of the so-called soil-plant atmosphere continuum. The breadth of his research program reflects Amilcare's unique intellectual curiosity. I just went to quickly through his list of publications, and we see that there is a broad recent research still ranges from geomorphology to the analysis of ion reduction and the dependence on soil moisture, dengue, fever, salinity, camp plant physiology, tree die-offs. So this is a huge array of a very broad research field or very broad range of interest. And in each one of these areas, we really see his distinctive and unique contribution that really advance research in these fields. So in conclusion, It is Amilcare Porporato is an extraordinary scientist and a leader in our field, and it is a great pleasure and a distinct honor for me to introduce him as the winner of the Dalton Medal by the European Geophysical Union.
Thank you very much, Paolo. So, Amilcare, the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Paolo. These are very generous words. Thank you. I appreciate them very much. Let's see if I can share. Can you see my presentation? Perfect.
Yes. You can.
Okay.
Great.
Well, again, thank you, Paolo. It's a pleasure. It's an honor to be here. I want to thank the EGU, all the colleagues and friends who supported me for this honor. It's totally thanks to them that I'm here. The topic of this presentation is it's about the dimensional analysis. I've decided to talk about dimensional analysis and scaling because this is dear to me from the times of the PhD, and it's actually probably of general interest for this type of audience. It's a set of methods that has its roots in the elegant group theory, but it also allows us to do some very practical work in geophysics, in ecohydrology, what I've called here street fighting hydrology, paraphrasing an interesting book, Street Fighting Mathematics. What we really, in a sense, are doing is the so-called Fermi reasoning, gathering our intuition around the problem, putting it together logically to arrive at conclusions that not necessarily are very precise, but they're usually not wrong, which is something very important. So Galileo was probably the first one who used these concepts of scaling and similarity and dimensional analysis itself. He applied it to investigate how the bone size in animals scales with their body mass. Many analyses have been done afterwards, but really this gives us the hope that if these techniques work for biology, which is definitely a complex science, there may be also hope that they will work for us in our complex systems of ecohydrology and geophysics, where we have multi-physics, where we have multi-scale processes. So what I'm going to do today, if time permits, is to present three applications to hydrologic partitioning, to rock weathering, and landscape evolution that we have developed recently. These are, apart from the first application, recent results that we have obtained in my group with my students and collaborators. So, but before doing that, let's just refresh our memory, if needed, of what is dimensional analysis very quickly. Well, we know that any dimension function can be written as a power law monomial of the scales. Here is just an example in mechanics. We have L and T, the scales of length, mass, and time, as we move from one system of units to the other. And we also know that there are special quantities that are these pi groups, these dimensionless variables that have dimension functions, which is unity. All the exponents are zero. These are the hinges around which the physics revolves. If we change not just the system of units, but even the class of the system of units, we go from length, mass, and time to force, length, and time. These numbers don't change. And then there is a very logical principle that we know from elementary school, that if we write a physical law, which is here boxed in blue, A equal to F function of governing quantities from 1 to n, they have to have the same units on one side and the other of the equal sign. And if we apply this dimensional homogeneity rigorously, thinking that these are generalized homogeneous function, we can write the famous pi theorem, which is at the bottom of this page, which basically tells us that the same physical law, the physical law is a really crucial step. That's where we put all our intuition. That's where if we don't know the equations or where we extract the information from the equation. But then from the blue box to the red box, the pi theorem just tells us to proceed without ambiguity to a dimensionless formulation of a new quantity pi, which is formed with a variable of interest a, as a function of dimensionless group. But the key thing to observe here is that the original physical law was on n variables in an n-dimensional space, and now we're working on an n minus k space. So a potentially very powerful dimension reduction, which is really the holy grail of any physical inquiry, including ours. There are two extra ingredients that I will use that are not necessarily part of dimensional analysis, but extremely important. There is this wonderful book that I recommend to everyone who has not seen it already by Barenblatt, listed here, that talks about them. Once you have obtained the pi theorem in this way, there may be, if we are lucky enough, there may be the chance that the problem is self-similar with respect to some of the groups. For example, here k+1, the k+1 group. In that case, it can be taken out as a power law. And if you are really lucky, you have the first type of self-similarity in which the exponent is 0, and then the group really goes away. Or you live with this power law, which is much better, at least to know the functional form with respect to a generic function. The other ingredient that I'm going to use is the so-called directional dimension analysis. I'm going to list it here because it's usually giving me lots of trouble with reviewers, because this is less known. And so for just with an example, so we know that here is the diffusion equation with the concentration at the bottom, and concentration is something that contains mass, changes in time, so we have time, and then there is a space x. So we are in a three-dimensional dimensional analysis space here, and we can do our obtain our solutions, very well known, the source type solution with dimensional analysis. What if now have the same equation applied, for example, in hydrology to the diffusive wave approximation for floods? Now y is no longer containing mass, but it's a length. And so we have a length y, we have a length t, we have a length x, and we only have 2 dimensions. Of course, the solution must be the same. This is telling us that y in reality has a different dimension from x, from Lx. And this is simply because it contains mass in itself. It's just been forgotten by some normalization. So that's all what I will be using in the following. So let's get to the first application I want to discuss with you in this sense. It's just the usual rainfall partitioning long term. We assume that there is a statistical equilibrium between what rains and the partitioning into evapotranspiration, ET, and the rest, which I will just call LQ, right, percolation and runoff. We need to build our, if we want to understand what's behind with these tools, we need to build our physical law. And we don't have equations. We don't have first principle equation to do this. So let's look at the data and let's look at our intuition of the process. Here is a growing season time series of soil moisture jumping up and down because of these pulses of rainfall. So when we say the evapotranspiration ET, and I'm building the physical law here, I'm going step by step, then I will repeat this without really going into the details, okay? So ET is a function of this alpha, which is the rainfall depth, is the average size of this, I hope you can see the cursor here, is the average size of these pulses of rainfall. Lambda, which is the frequency of how frequently they occur. And then we have E naught, which is potential evapotranspiration. And we can say that, of course, it depends on how deep the soil. If we are in a parking lot, it's just going to all flow away as percolation and runoff. If we have very deep soils, we'll accommodate lots of it for subsequent evapotranspiration. So this is a decent list. We'll see if it works. It's our intuition, it's our Fermi reasoning, let's say. And then let's just say, okay, we count the dimensions. We have a length, alpha. We have a 1 over time, which is the frequency lambda, which is E naught, is the length over time. These are rates, ET also. It's very easy to do the pi theorem here. We potentially have four governing quantities, and potentially they can be cast into a two-dimensional space. And in fact, this is what you can do. You just write these pi groups. The first pi group is just the normalization of ET over rainfall. Alpha times lambda is the long-term rainfall rate. And then we have a function of the dryness index, which is this E naught over alpha over lambda, and what we call the storage index, which is the active soil depth compared to the how much rainfall we add each time into this control volume. So what do the data tell us? Now we need to see if our original reasoning was correct and then was simplified to a two-dimensional space by the pi theorem. We took, and this has been done by many people, certainly not just by us, starting from the famous work of Budyko. If we take the MOPEX data for the US river basins, we see that the points tend to gather along a curve, telling us that the dryness index of Budyko is the dominant control of this function. And then there is a spread around it, which we have shown to be related to the index, the storage index gamma. Now, this means that when you have, for example, seasonal climates in which this storage in and out season by season is important, then you deviate from the famous so-called universal Budyko curve. Okay, so this gives us a sense of what we can do with this type of methods. Let's apply to a more recent problem of interest to us, which is the rock weathering and the soil formation associated to it. So what happens here is that there is another very interesting partitioning taking place at much longer time scales. This interest has been elicited to me by also the collaboration with the many friends and colleagues of the critical zone observatories here, for example, at the Calhoun in South Carolina. So what we have is that you have the denudation, which is basically the release of minerals from the bedrock, which is then lost either by erosion, surface erosion, by fluvial erosion or wind erosion, or by chemical weathering, just percolated away into the stream waters. And so we have the denudation, which is in the long term, again, the equal to the sum of weathering and erosion. Let's do the reasoning as before, building our physical law. So we can say that the weathering is a function of the denudation rate, a maximum potential chemical weathering, exactly like the potential evapotranspiration rate that we had before. So W, D, and W max have the same units. And then, of course, we need to put all the chemistry and the biology, which is listed here as concentration of dissolved inorganic carbon, the percolation rate that we had before, and so on. But we can also say that all of these, roughly speaking, to a first order, are maybe a function of hydrology. So let's just put here, instead of all this list, the dryness index. The advantage is that it is already dimensionless, and so we don't have to worry about doing the pi theorem there. And if we do the pi theorem, we get to the function to the right, where the space is reduced by 1, plus the reduction that just followed by adding the dryness index. And so we have the potential depletion rate and the depletion rate linked together. That's how much we can do with dimensional analysis starting from this physical law. But then we can interrogate the data and see if something else can be done. And that's what Salvo Calabrese, my former student, did. And the good news is that when you check the relationship between potential and actual depletion rates, they stay on a linear function. And so we have actually a self-similarity of the second type, very simple, with exponent equal to 1, that allows us to write a final form, which is extremely simple. W, the normalized weathering rate, a dimensionless function of the dryness index. Now, we were extremely excited, and the we is the royal we, because actually the analysis was done by Salvo first, when he plotted all these global data sets as a function of the dryness index, to see that I mean, of course, there is lots of scatter, as to be expected. We don't want to be precisely right, or at least we cannot even ask to be precisely right. But there is a strong dependence on the dryness index. You can see that if the climate is very wet, you have lots of weathering, and this weathering actually drops very non-linearly between 1 and 1.5 to then stay on a fat tail. It doesn't really decay very slowly at very high dryness index. And that was we were very happy with this result. Also because then we only have one parameter in this curve, which is alpha. We're still thinking on the meaning of this shape that then we found for this. This was just interpolation from the data. So I haven't checked my time. I hope I'm not doing too badly. But the last application, Helena, please shout at me if I'm getting too excited and then talking too much. But for the time that remains, I'd like to talk about applying these concepts to landscape evolution, to this spatial complexity that we see in this figure. We know that the weathering and the erosion don't take place uniformly, homogeneously in space, but there is an instability in the evolution of landscapes that gives rise to these very beautiful patterns of valleys and ridges that form these dendritic shapes that we can see here. And so we will apply scaling and similarity, and we will use the data that you see here. This is the critical zone observatory landscape digital elevation data that we got very high resolution. We will also use control laboratory experiments. This is a nice experiment that was done by Arvind Singh and Effie Fofula Giorgio at the St. Anthony Falls lab. They gave us the data to check our theories. They are actually co-authors in one of the paper, and also theory. We do a numerical simulation of a minimalist landscape evolution model. This is the model. Many of you will know it. It's the rate of change of z, which is the elevation of the landscape that depends on a diffusion, which represents the soil creep. This is very much used in geomorphology as the so-called detachment limited approximation. Erosion, due to fluvial erosion, you have this sink term where you have a constant k. A is really a crucial variable here, is the specific contributing area. Then you have the gradient you have the slope and the tectonic uplift. The difference between what is done normally in the literature is that we are using the specific contributing area, which is the right variable to do. Many people use the contributing area, which is not defined at a point, and then that creates lots of trouble with grid resolution, and it's just not a well-posed equation, because this also allows us to realize that A is coupled to its own equation. So this is the closed system that we solve numerically. And then we can just do a little bit of theory to see what type of shapes, what type of patterns we get. For example, we can try to study the sediment budget here. Just we integrate this equation, the first one, over an area. And the last term is very easy to integrate. The uplift, we consider it constant, so it just gives us u times a. Okay, I cannot point here because I have the figures, but it's here. The first one is also not difficult to integrate. You just do integration by parts. You get the slope of the elevation at the boundary, and this is the length of the perimeter of the boundary. What is really problematic is this guy, because this contains all the complexity, how the slope and how the contributing area goes. But let's see if dimensional analysis now can help us. We are lucky that we have equations, so let's see what we can do. We will use a long strip of land here, where there is basically only one important length scale L, and we write our physical law. So the slope at the boundary, the average slope at the boundary, I should have said, this is a function of the diffusion coefficient, the uplift rate, this length scale, and all the other quantities. N and M are already dimensionless. And then we do our pi theorem. This is just at this point, a machinery that we just crank out automatically, no? And what we get is this number here that contains this is basically the sediment that comes out of the area because of soil creep, as a function of a very important dimensionless quantity, which is the channelization index. And if we see the simulations now as plotted as a function of the channelization index, which controls the whole dynamic at this point, given n and m, we'll see something that reminds us of what happens in turbulence. It's like increasing the Reynolds number and getting more and more channel, more and more vortices, if you wish, more complexity. If we plot the sediment budget in this dimensionless form as a function of the channelization index, okay, we can see that there is a natural partitioning that appears between how much we lose by fluvial erosion, this complicated term. We here is just analytical, numerical simulation, versus soil creep, but it's organized as a function of one variable only. We are actually we are actually able to solve analytically, at least for the case of without channels, and get this red curve that we can use as a benchmark for our numerical simulation. And if you look at this curve and you are familiar with fluid mechanics, you may actually be thinking of another partitioning of at least the energy partitioning that we're familiar with the Moody diagram in pipe flow. And to me, this looks quite similar. The unchannelized solution is like the laminar solution, and then the channelized one are the turbulence one and then you have the dissipation due to the viscous forces and the one due to turbulent forces. So that was kind of suggestive, and suggested us actually the next application, which is, can we get some ideas of the, for example, mean elevation profile? Now, if you take one of our simulation and you go here up and down, you see a very complicated sequence of valleys and ridges. But can we get the z bar, the average of that, as a function of the distance from the boundary? Let's see if dimensional analysis can help us. For those who, again, know a little bit of turbulence and fluid mechanics, they will recognize that I'm following the steps here of the velocity profile in turbulence. So we list our variable, the rate at which z bar, the mean elevation, changes with the distance, is a function of distance from the boundary, an elevation scale, let's say the mean depth, the diffusion, and everything. So we have lots of variables taken from the equations, and we have 7 of them. And the hope is that we can get rid at least of 3. And in fact, the pi theorem is not a hope. We can do that. It's a mathematical fact. And we get into a 4-dimensional space. Still a very complicated, very high-dimensional space that we cannot even plot. But then we went to the data. And the data, the simulations showed us that at some point, as we push the channelization index, we get to a self-similar profile. It tends to stay the same, with an interesting inflection here, which we will see in a moment is a logarithmic shape. And all of this suggests us that there is a self-similar behavior going on in all the other quantities. So this is a first type self-similar behavior that allows us to go directly to a function like this. And now we want to see the shape. This is the profile. This is the phi is the normalized elevation as a function of the normalized distance. You see there is eta here and eta here. You can integrate quickly and get a logarithmic profile. And in fact, this is very similar, at least as an analogy, to what happens in the flattening of the velocity profile in turbulence. And as we plot our simulations, we see that indeed, with increasing the channelization index, we get this in log scale, we get this linear profile, which is a logarithmic elevation profile. The interesting thing is that this k, the slope of the logarithmic profile, now depends on the parameters of the simulations. For example, the exponent m. And so this is work done by Milad Ushar, my former postdoc, plotting the results of the scaling as a function of m, and then comparing it with the XLE, is the laboratory experiment, and the value that we obtained checking the elevation. We found a logarithmic profile also in the Kaloon, in the real landscape, in which the k value is here, and for the experiments instead, for the laboratory experiments, we got a slightly higher k value. But when we compare it with the simulation, it allows us to infer. Sorry for that. It allows us to infer the possible value of the exponent m to be used in the simulation to get realistic results, which is something, a bonus that we were not expected, and it was quite useful for us. How much time do I have, Helena?
Well, some maybe 2 or 4 for conclusions.
Okay. Then I'm going to skip.
Depends how many questions you want at the end.
I would like to get lots of questions. I'm going to skip this. I'm just going to give the gist of the final application. This is a paper that just came out in GRL, also by Milad Ushar, with also co-author also Gabi Katul at Duke University. It's about the power spectrum of the elevation sequence that we get in our simulations. We get very complicated. So this is a cross section of this landscape, up and downs, ridges, valleys, and so on. As we increase the channelization index, we can compute the power spectrum, of course, of these signals, do a dimensional analysis, apply the pi theorem. As in turbulence, there is a self-similar behavior. At some point you get to expect that because of this fractal behavior behind all these valleys and ridges, and we found that a power law profile of the power spectrum, which actually matches well in terms of values with the logarithmic profile that we saw before. So we were excited about these results. I thought they would hopefully be of interest to show that dimensional analysis can be quite useful in our field. And so I get to my conclusions. Now there are, of course, people around that think that all of this business of dimensions is going to be a conspiracy theory, I guess. These people of Nukuyama get very precise results, but certainly add up apples and oranges, so to speak. But the bottom line is that dimensional analysis is not something that is a panacea, a solution for everything, a silver bullet, if you wish. There is this key role of the physical law. That's the ingredient that the investigator has to start with. Enough information, but not too much. That's really determining. And then it's an iterative process between your hypothesis, your physical law, and some people say you need to know what you look for. You need to know the result. That's not a drawback. You go to see the results, and if it is wrong, you go back and you reformulate your physical law. It's not that we knew from the beginning, or people know from the beginning what to put in the cooking pan, no? And so it requires a constant reality check between your formulation, your hypothesis, the field, the laboratory data, and the simulation. But once you have that, it's a powerful tool. It's a very rewarding set of methods that I really hope people consider seriously and use in their field. Thank you very much.